Hopefully you guys have got me now. I was trying the audio on my camera there, and I guess it wasn't picking me up. It was showing on the meter, but, whatever. The audio stream's current bitrate is 0. That's what YouTube is bitching about, but it should be back in a second. All right. Yeah, I was trying the audio on the camera to see how that was going to work, but clearly it ain't. So that, or I set it to not pick me up and forgot to reset it or something, just so I wouldn't have to run back and forth with the mic boom this morning. Anyway, so to go back to where I was 3 minutes ago, Rusty couldn't make it today, unfortunately. His work kept him from hanging out last night, so whatever the problem was, it lapsed over into this morning. But, when you're out there making a living, doing important stuff, it's hard, to just take a slice out of the middle of the day. So thank you, James, Adam, everybody, for your patience there. So anyway, we'll make some fun today, and today we're going to look in our ongoing jumping around the Dungeon Master's Guide, Best Practices for DMing. We're going to take a look at a couple of sections of the Dungeon Master's Guide that are just fun. They're so much fun. TSR back in the day was the 800-pound gorilla of role-playing games. And even with the slight exception of the year that Magic the Gathering dropped. And these numbers are hard to gauge because you got to understand, back in 1990, getting a hold of people to get their opinions on anything meant actually going out and talking to people. And the only way to do that for a role-playing game really was going to a convention, maybe calling some hobby shops. Because if you're trying to bring together data, you're not going to, TSR wants to know what the most popular role-playing game is. Well, who can they ask? Well, they can ask people at Gen Con, at that time, TSR-sponsored convention, what games they preferred. And you can kind of skew that. They're not going to go in and say, hey, we've lost popularity. So, yeah, getting those numbers was a little bit of... took a little bit of math wizardry. So with the exception of 1990 or 1992, whenever Vampire the Masquerade dropped, TSR Dungeons & Dragons was always the number one role-playing game. So they didn't have a lot of competition. In fact, early on in the company, the only competition Dungeons & Dragons had were other TSR role-playing games. Surely you had some that came out pretty quickly. Ken St. Andre was never impressed with D&D, and hence we got Tunnels and Trolls. Steve Jackson Games, Games Designers Workshop hit pretty quick with Traveler. And then you had Melee and In the Labyrinth and Wizard from Steve Jackson Games, or they may have those may have been published through Amarillo Design Bureau before. I don't know my mini games history. But while you certainly had a lot of people nipping at TSR's heels, even their secondary games were doing better than a lot of companies' main products, flagship products. So a couple of those were Gemma World, which per James Ward, on this very live stream was designed to be compatible with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It says it right in the rules. This is designed to be compatible with AD&D. Prior to then, they had jolly mixtures of the predecessor, the first science fiction role-playing game ever, which was, of course, Metamorphosis Alpha, and original D&D back in the old Geneva Wargamings. But this game was designed to be compatible with. And having DM'd it for the first time ever at GaryCon 2020, I can tell you, if you can run or play AD&D, you can run or play Gamma World. It's really, really, really simple. It is really incredibly simple. So naturally, the idea of mixing the two genres would come to Dungeon Masters. And it's a clever bit of cross-promotion to get some more role-playing games in people's hands. So in the Dungeon Masters Guide, over on page 112, I'm going to zoom this in so we can get the nice single column again. There are two sections. Now, the impact, the result of these two sections is bigger than the scant amount of information given here in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But we have two sections in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The first one is called Six Guns and Sorcery. Whether or not you have a warp, throw Boot Hill gunfighters into your AD&D world, or the adventurers from your fantasy milieu enter a Wild West setting, the conversions are the same. Converting and discovering character statistics is handled as follows. Bam! Gary just hits us with that. Not convoluted rules, not anything, just like, by the way, if this happens, do this. So we have strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma. That's if you're bringing, and what to do if you're bringing Boot Hill characters over. And then if you're bringing your AD&D characters to Boot Hill, speed equals dexterity percent score. Dexterity score equals percent score. Gun accuracy, all have 01 initially. Each 6 rounds fired adds +1 until a maximum of 25. Throwing accuracy, use normal attack tables for AD&D. Strength, as shown, 18 up to 51 equals 19. 18, 51 and greater equals 20. Bravery, modified as follows. Cleric, -2 times wisdom. Fighter, -1 times wisdom. Magic user, -3. And thief or monk. Experience, initially no experience, subject to later results. Hit dice. Each Boot Hill character is equal to a second level fighter, 2d10 plus constitution bonus if any. In addition, for each category of gunfighting experience a Boot Hill character has, add 1 additional level of fighter ability, i.e. add 1d10 plus applicable bonus. Armor class, as in AD&D, so most Boot Hill characters will have AC 10, no armor, at least initially. Saving throws, the Boot Hill characters save at their fighter level as noted above under hit dice. Fighting ability, Boot Hill characters have fighter level as noted above under hit dice. Movement, base unarmored movement for Boot Hill characters is 12 inches. Horses are all light. Turn sequence, use AD&D normal unless both sides are using firearms, in which case the Boot Hill turn sequence and first shot determination. Use the Boot Hill first, anyway. When the AD&D turn sequence is used, then for initiative, give +1 to Boot Hill characters who are unarmored and using firearms. Very potent. Weapon range, boot hill inches convert to AD&D inches. Rate of firearms. Use the rate of fire shown in boot hill as the number of shots allowed per round with no penalty for firing more than one shot. As the round is a full minute, you may optionally allow double rate of fire with a minus 10% penalty for all shots fired above the standard rate, the penalty being cumulative, i.e. 3 shots equals 30% penalty on each extra shot. Reloading rate equals segments per round so that any firearm can be completely reloaded in one round. And then you've got weapon speed factor, AD&D missile rate of fire, weapon class. Adjustments for armor worn, for shot determination modifier. Note that says due to armor worn. It does not deal with creatures that just have thick hides and they obviously don't wear armor. Hit determination, armor class, and modifier. Do not include dexterity bonus to armor class for purposes of modifying hit determination. Wounds. Each hit causes damage as follows. Several hits from the same weapon being computed separately. Now, this got a little bit of attention from the Murphy's Rules section in Space Gamer. Because if you look... Now, I take a little bit of exception to Murphy's Rules because it implies that the cannon's firing solid shot, and it isn't. It's firing canister, which is essentially steel balls, spare buckshot you got lying around, bits of glass, gravel, anything you can stuff down the neck of a smoothbore cannon before you yank the lanyard or light the fuse. Does 3 to 12 damage, which is not enough to slay the average third level fighter. But that's okay because it's a cloud of shrapnel, not a solid shot, which I would put in a different order altogether, like maybe treat it like a stick of dynamite. But then there's range modifiers, arrow, tomahawk, hand axe, etc., as in AD&D, and then the firearms down there. No saving throw allowed for dynamite. You may optionally allow save treating the explosion as if it were a fireball, but damage base must then be increased to 6 to 36. Any circumstance not covered here can be extrapolated from this work and or Boot Hill. Referees might well find that some AD&D monsters and characters will prove interesting inhabitants for old mines or hidden valleys. Now, I'm going to go off on a bit of a rant here. Just a little bit of one. Not about what is said here. First, I'll read. Transfer all firearms to the AD&D campaign. Unless you desire to have gunpowder muddying the waters in your fantasy world, it is strongly urged that Boot Hill firearms be confined to specific areas. And when gunpowder is brought into the fantasy world, it becomes inert junk. Ergo, no clever alchemist can duplicate it. Likewise, dynamite and similar explosives become inert. So, if you fall into the unless category, use that. Just don't let gunpowder work. Players outside of this realm, players that come to you and say, my character wants to invent a musket. Fix them in your steely gaze and say, what's a musket? Even if you know what a musket is. Basically, you got to 2-year-old them to death if you don't want firearms in your game. Well, you know, I want a metal tube that pushes a metal ball out the end with the aid of an explosion created by some sort of alchemical compound. All right. At this point, you're talking years of research on the part of the character. Wishes notwithstanding, by the way, don't just let them say, I happen to have a scroll with wish on it. I'll wish for this. Screw that wish. I mean, literally, screw that wish up for them. We gotta make a blunderbuss. But don't. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're going to do this, treat firearms as other handgun with all those range modifiers, and think about 14th century matchlocks. You get maybe two volleys in a minute. So a 14th century matchlock is only slightly more effective than an arrow. Powder's going to get wet and get ruined constantly, particularly in a dungeon environment. And even if a character explains to an alchemist how to make more of it, other than the alchemist that they first explained it to, odds are they could screw it up. Well, salt should be just as good as saltpeter, shouldn't it? Nope. Sorry, I screwed up your batch of fire powder. It's going to take me another month. Or another 2 weeks, or whatever. So be very careful. It's fun to see what things do. A Gatling gun is 1 to 8. Slightly fewer modifiers than an other handgun. A shotgun is more potent than a Gatling gun. Other shoulder arms, 2 to 8. But I said that the sum of this was greater than the whole. If you wanted to have, say, instead of an Old West 1880s, 1890s style game, but have your D&D characters in the middle of World War I. Here's how to do it. Use the boot heel rules. Even World War II, although by then you're starting to get some kind of advanced firearms, machine guns, and I know there were machine guns in World War I. Don't misunderstand me. But I'm talking about just like every third soldier is toting an MP40 or an M3 grease gun. Every squad has an MG34 or a 30 cal or a BAR or something like that. But the rant that I was going to have, somebody, again, I really shouldn't look at Facebook. I really shouldn't do anything with Facebook, but there we are. I was getting the stream set up for a stream earlier in the week. And over in a first edition AD&D group, somebody posted up a technically competent picture, but it was like new style fantasy art. And the character in question in the image was wearing plate mail that, in addition to being impossible for them to bend their legs in, like if they bent their leg backwards all the way the plates were enjoined and everything, it would sever their leg at the knee. It was clearly supposed to look like Iron Man power armor with the hexagonal plated knee pads on the boots and everything. But if it If the person like fell, it would amputate their leg. But yeah, they were wearing plate mail that looked like power armor and had this impossibly long-barreled firearm slung on their back. And somebody just posted it without comment. And rightly, some folks were like, how is this even AD&D? This is ridiculous. And because many people in the AD&D Facebook groups, which is why I don't post there anymore, I don't even link to my videos anymore there, are literally only in those groups to tear them down from the inside, everybody pounced on anyone criticizing the image. You don't like it because it's a woman. You don't like it because she's black. You don't like it because it's new art. You don't like it because you're gatekeeping old grognards, blah, 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 blah. But I was just pissed off by the fact that she was carrying a slung rifle, and it was supposed to be AD&D. Not in my D&D, guys. But if you want to, here is how you can do it. Here is how you can have firearms. I mean, realistically, a Gatling gun, 1 to 8 per hit, that thing should be firing like 40, 50 bullets. Gatling guns back in the day were not 7.62 or 5.56. They fired 13, 14 millimeter bullets. Some were 45 caliber, which is 10 millimeter. They were not lightweight weapons. When the Army finally adopted them, they were considered field artillery. They were not squad support weapons. So I would deem a Gatling gun to be a lot more lethal than that. 1 to 8, maybe 3 to 8, 3 to 24. Or at the very least, similar to a cannon. Keep the range brackets the same, but 3 to 12 because of a burst of bullets coming out of the end of it. So that's my polemic about firearms and AD&D. You can do it. Here are the rules to do it. I don't recommend you do it. Although Tolkien did have gunpowder in The Lord of the Rings, the blasting fire brought by the orcs at the siege of I keep wanting to say Minas Tirith. No, Helm's Deep. Which, when I read the book when I was a kid, I assumed that was like a magic spell that they'd used. I didn't even think gunpowder. But now let's talk about the other option, the other white meat. Mutants and magic. Readers of The Dragon might already be familiar with the concept of mixing science fantasy and heroic fantasy from reading my previous article about the adventures of a group of AD&D characters transported via a curse scroll to another continuum and ending up amidst the androids and mutants above the starship Warden of Metamorphosis Alpha. Whew. Rather than go back over that ground again, it seems more profitable, yes it was, to discuss instead the many possibilities of the DM if he or she includes a gateway to a post-atomic war Earth a la Gamma World. Definitely more profitable because now you can get DMs to go out and buy Gamma World. When I was a kid and I read these two sections, man, I wanted Gamma World and Boot Hill. I didn't get them, but I wanted them. The two game systems are not alien. It says right there in Gamma World, made to be compatible with AD&D. And interfacing them is not difficult. The challenges are very interesting for AD&D characters, and it might get one of the participants interested enough to get a separate Gamma World campaign going, thus giving all of you a new field for gaming, and most important, give you a break from DMing continually. Exactly. Passerby and Chris. Very correct. Since when did D&D care about realism? Well, True. Cooley says, I don't do firearms in my D&D. It's one way to keep it separate from my other games. With magic, would gunpowder even be discovered? Exactly. Would gunpowder even be discovered? There's I think it's Ambrose Bierce who wrote a short story called The Ingenious Patriot. And it's about this fellow who goes to the king and explains to him that agents from the enemy country approached him to make him invent a new armor-piercing shell that could punch through the warships of the kingdom he was. But he said, for the sum of 10,000, I will produce an armor that is proof against that. And he keeps going back and forth, upping the stakes, saying, in this pocket I have the formula for an armor-piercing shell that can punch through that arm, and so on. And finally the king orders the guards to seize him and says, how many pockets does he have in total? 24. Write him a check for 2.4 million tum-tums or the unit of money, and then hang him by the neck until he's dead. And the king passed a law against being too clever. So yeah, don't let your characters try the ingenious patriot trick on you. A king may actively suppress this new blasting powder if he's afraid it would get into the hands of the peasantry or the enemy or what have you. Adam says, do people really need breaks from DMing continually? I wouldn't hate to play every once in a while. Although I shouldn't phrase it like that. I would like to play a player character, one single player character, and let someone else DM. When you're the DM, you are playing. You do have a chance to play. Remember, everybody at the table, they've just got the one character, and if they die, they got to start over. You, as the DM, you have billions of characters to play. So don't forget that. So just keep that in mind. All right, so let's talk about Gamma World. So character abilities are pretty much down the line the same. The only difference is when it comes to Gamma World to AD&D, use mental strength instead of wisdom, and when converting AD&D to Gamma World, use wisdom instead of mental strength. Otherwise, the same. Magic resistance and radiation resistance, none. Gamma World characters should be allowed to retain their total based on Constitution, while AD&D characters should retain their hit dice and bonus points gained by level. This will make AD&D characters very flimsy in Gamma World. Just be aware. Now, this intrigued me when I was a kid, the armor types. Gamma World armor to AD&D armor class. Not the armor type, or not the armor classes, but the armor types. Because Gamma World has descending ACs also. No protection, shield, furs or skin, leather or padded. So far, we're in fairly familiar territory. Leather or padded plus shield, studded leather or ringmail. Furs or skins, shield, cured hide armor. Okay. Plant fiber armor, partial carapace. And we have the AD&D equivalents of cured hide or plant fiber armor, shield or total carapace, sheath armor, piece metal armor, total carapace, sheath armor, piece metal armor, or total carapace and shield, powered plate, plastic armor, powered alloy, energized, inertia, powered scout, battle armor, powered attack, and assault armor. Now this is interesting. Gamma World characters get no save against magic spells, although some mental mutations will modify this rule. Likewise, AD&D characters are not allowed any radiation resistance. Poison save should use the GW matrix in a Gamma World area, otherwise the AD&D system is used. All other saving throws are per AD&D, with Gamma World characters being considered as fighters. Those with mental mutation approximating spell abilities should gain the benefit saving as a 1st through 5th level magic user if the saving throw category is therefore superior to that of fighters. Level of ability is based on the number of experience points, and then it lists, because Gamma World doesn't do levels. That's a big compatibility break. You just go by blocks of experience points when determining where the Gamma World character would save on an AD&D matrix. Gamma World characters in an AD&D world fight at the level indicated by their accumulated experience points. AD&D characters use the ladder system of resolution to hit regardless of level. Movement rates are the same. Turn sequence, use AD&D, considering a search move as a round and a combat melee round as a segment. Weapon ranges. Outdoors convert Gamma World meters to AD&D inches, the latter being yards. In an underground setting, do not lower artifact weapons from Gamma World to AD&D inches. Triple their ranges to make up for the ground scale being reduced to 1/3 indoor. Rate of fire, use AD&D, converting GW combat melee turns to AD&D round segments when applicable. Use AD&D initiative, 2 hit bonuses. Allow all normal bonuses, except the strength of GW character will give bonuses rather than dexterity, which will improve armor class of GW characters not wearing artifact protection. Damage, as shown in AD&D, for all weapons except those only found in Gamma World. In the latter case, damage is shown as in Gamma World. Fatigue, ignore fatigue, or you may opt to use it only for GW characters. Mental combat, unless AD&D psionic abilities are present, use the GW system, otherwise the AD&D psionic combat system. Wisdom indicates mental strength. Now this is interesting because this didn't really come up in Boot Hill, but spells, yeah, everyone is kind of flimsy in Gamma World, coolly. Spells, magic users without their books will not be able to regain spells. Clerics in a GW setting will be totally out of touch with their deity or deities, and so they will be unable to regain spells above 2nd level. Certain mental mutation powers resemble spells and vice versa. Mental defenselessness, for instance, will allow any illusion, phantasm, or enchantment charm spell to function automatically against him, her, or it. A mental defense shield will give a bonus of +4 on saving throw against the very same form of attack, and detect both mental powers and magic. Furthermore, characters with this ability would certainly have all 5 forms of psionic defense modes to use. Mental control over physical state would enable override of hold spells and paralysis effects also. Mental control used against any AD&D creature would be regarded as a magic jar attempt. Likewise, certain AD&D spells would be very helpful against GW characters, creatures, and weapons. A minor globe of invulnerability, for example, would prevent mental attack forms, which approximate spells up to 3rd level, inclusive. Invulnerability to normal missiles would be effective against slug throwers, needlers, and fragmentation devices, as well as medieval technology missiles. A wall of force would stop many beams and rays as well, but blasters and torque grenades, especially basically disintegration weapons, would bring it down instantly. Whenever any case arises, use the examples and principles above to help you adjudicate the results. And then he talks about GW artifacts, which really requires going into the GW rules a little bit more than we're doing here. And that's pretty much it. Now, if you wanted to run a science fiction game leaning very heavily on the AD&D rules, like, look, I'm not going to go get a copy of Gamma World, and I'm not going to go get a copy of Boot Hill. I'm just going to use AD&D. You could use both of these systems, because your good science fiction systems will not only have blasters, but it'll also have slug throwers. I mean, a bullet is, regardless of your setting, still an incredibly efficient way to kill a man or woman or creature or monster, or cause an android to not function, to bring it down, to stop it. So even if you don't necessarily have Gamma World or Boot Hill, these rules should give you a prompting as to how to build your own science fiction game out of the AD&D rules. I mean, Passerby said, "We're going to make a blunderbuss. Sorry, played too much Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So, yeah, you could do a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay-esque setting using the AD&D rules and the firearms rules from Six Guns and Sorcery. Or alternately, you could use the GW rules for a 40K type setting. Although, unlike the Boot Hill conversion tables, there's nothing for Gamma World weapons, so you'd have to best guess it. Or, the next best step, if you really want to build a sci-fi game out of first edition AD&D, but you don't want to go get Gamma World, grab yourself a copy of Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. Expedition to the Barrier Peaks has a crap ton of science fiction weapons. It's got blasters, it's got lasers, it's got grenades, it's got power armor, it's got healing sprays, computers, robots, all kinds of stuff like that in it. Couple that with what you picked up in these two sections, bam, you can run a first edition AD&D rules system based science fiction campaign. It's just that easy to do. Should you do it? That's really up to you. But if you want to, if you truly want to, if you really and honestly want to merge these two settings, or these two genres, these sections, and a copy of Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. Now, I recommend, just based on the fact that it's just a great little game and everything you need is in one thin, I think, 90-page booklet, do grab a copy of Gamma World. Or even a copy of Metamorphosis Alpha. Get both. But there's plenty of cross-genre fun you can have. Now, I want to touch on one thing, because I said we were going to talk about this. Remember back when I was railing about psionics and how bad psionics could be in your game? Where is it? I'm looking for a table. Hang on, guys. Oh, this is going to suck. You know what? Here. Let's just go back to the table of contents. Unknown technology experimentation charts for the win. Yes, they're a little difficult to come to grips with, but they are kind of fun. Especially if you grew up having to make flowcharts for programming back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, taking computer classes in high school and junior high. I'm looking, let's see. There we go. It's right there. And did I misspell it? Sonic Encounter. Okay, 184. So let's go over to page 182. Remember when I said psionics were not such a great idea in your game? We're going to talk about that a little bit. If you opt to include psionic powers in your campaign, then certain random encounters will be with psionically empowered creatures. Check for random encounters as is normal. But if the player party has used psionic powers during the last turn, and this is key right here, or spells resembling psionic powers during the last round. Not during the last turn, but during the last round. Then the chance for a psionic encounter will be 1 in 4 if an encounter is otherwise indicated. So, if you are out of doors, even if you haven't, you go back to camp, or you're on the road, you've cleaned out the dungeon, congratulations. You got Professor X with you over here. But he's not necessarily doing anything. You're like, oh, Bob the Fighter, you took a couple of stab wounds there. Let me heal you up. And you as the DM dice to see if there's that daily random encounter. Oh, look, there is. There's a 25% chance that something psionic related may show up. Now that may not sound that bad. Oh, spells that resemble psionic powers? Okay, ESP maybe, telekinesis. No. The list is long and distinguished. Spells resembling psionic powers. Astral spell, well, sure. Augury, okay. Blink, well, that's okay. Any charm spell, well, that's mind affecting. Clairaudience and clairvoyance, sure. Cure, any. That's right. Cure light wounds that you just put on Bob. A random encounter happens. Now we're going to see if there's a psionic encounter. So your poor innocent cleric is curing light wounds on everybody now that you're outside of the dungeon. And you've got Dark Phoenix or Professor X or whoever over there not doing anything. But it can still induce a random psionic encounter. Any detection. Detect traps. Dimension door. Enlarge. ESP, of course. Featherfall. Feign death. Heal. Heat metal. Hypnotism. Invisibility. No alignment. Levitation. Plane shift. Polymorph. Remove curse. Shape change. Stone tell. Teleport. Telekinesis. Or temporal stasis. Any of those spells, and I think it's damn dangerous that cure light wounds, cure serious wounds, or cure critical wounds can all induce a psionic encounter. And yes, those are true even if there's no psionic PC in the party, but your players have all said, can I check to see if I have psionic? Sure. Oh, no, you didn't have it. They're the ones who cross the line of death. And magic items performing these powers, or those which duplicate psionic abilities, can be included as spell functions. You got a Rod of Resurrection, you got a Wand of, a Staff of Curing. So let's look at what can happen if things go completely off the rails because your characters wanted psionics when you didn't. A brain mole. Well, that really only affects psionic characters. It's not nothing to worry about. Cerebral Parasites, same. Coatl, hey, those things are good. It just kind of pops into existence. Maybe it says something cryptic and then flies away. Maybe it provides a boon to the party. Oh, look. Major and minor demons, or a demon prince. And that's not some edge case. I mean, on percentile dice, look at all the terrible stuff that can pop in, potentially. So we roll our random encounter. That was a brain mole, by the way. A major demon, a minor demon, a demon prince, an archdevil, a greater devil, a human psionicist may come wandering along, mind flayers, yellow mold, which doesn't sound that sensible, but yellow mold, if it gets big enough, can get psionic. It's crazy, but I love it. It's gonzo AD&D. Chris says, my players were all excited about adding psionics until I explained this to them. You shouldn't have. You should have just introduced it. Mind Flayer, that makes sense. It's going to be bunched around an intellect devourer or an intellect devourer or a Kirin. Now, the Tritons showing up, I would, if your characters are in a dungeon, I wouldn't have, I mean, Tritons are mermen, except they have two, instead of legs, they have long legs that end in fins. I wouldn't necessarily have Tritons show up in the middle of your desert campaign because somebody cast Cure Light Wounds and you rolled a 98, or a 99 rather. I would adjust. So maybe only that for water encounters. Numbers appearing 10 to 60. So, if you're in the ocean, on a ship, in a boat, drifting out to sea, just clinging to some flotsam, then maybe. And then that could be a good thing. I get you, Chris. I read you. So, yeah. You have a very high chance. I mean, can you imagine? It's like first or second level characters. I'll Cure Light Wounds on Bob. Asmodeus shows up. I'm sorry, what? Asmodeus shows up. Or Orcus, or Geryon, or Dispater, or Jewy-Blex, the blob god. Just all kinds of horribleness could happen. So, if your characters insist on having a crack at the psionic table, smile, say sure. Oh, none of you got psionics. They're the ones who just flipped a switch and allowed this to happen. But on a long enough timeline, Demogorgon may show up and screw up the party for casting one Cure Light Wound spell. But odds are it's not going to be something like that. It'll be something awful like an intellect devourer or a brain mole. 56. What do we get for 56? A lich. Well, that's fun. A lich just comes one of who's doing all the psionics. More brain moles out of these dice. There's a lich again. 41. Intellect devourer. 90. A Sioux monster. Well, Sioux monsters. 1 to 12 of them. 10 Sioux monsters. It's like, oh yeah, these weird looking monkeys are leaping down the hall at you. They're frying your brains. So yeah, when I said, back when we were doing the lessons on the player's handbook, psionics are a bad idea and you shouldn't include them in your game. But if you're gonna be prepared, this is why. That right there is why you don't, or do. Maybe you do. Maybe you want this. And maybe your characters never discover why all these weird monsters keep showing up every time they cast any of these spells. But if you do include psionics, do include psionic encounters, and do stick to this table. And it's interesting that Raise Dead doesn't, but Cure and Heal do. And as pointed out, it's true even if there's no psionicists in the party. They can show up. Now, some of them, again, a brain mole and a cerebral parasite shouldn't be that much of a threat. I'm gonna let's take a quick look in the let's take a look in the monster manual is what I was trying to say. Sorry, I got a message there. The brain mole. Brownie. All right. So they have psionic ability. 121 point attack. Attack mode is B. Small mole-like animals which inhabit most places above and below ground. Brain moles are attracted by psionic activity. So, yeah, a brain mole, just a little, they just look like star-nosed moles, but they're psionic. Including magic spells which duplicate psionic effects. When a brain mole is within 30 feet of any creature exercising such psionic activity, it will seek to feed upon the energy being used by psionically burrowing into the mind. This has the effect of attacking the mind with a 121 point strength mind thrust upon the creature using psionic energy. This burrowing will have a 20% chance melee round of causing permanent insanity in non-psionically endowed creatures. So yeah, actually brain moles can screw you up. Cessation of the spell or abandoning the use of magic will immediately relieve the attack. A psionic under attack must escape the range of the brain mole or kill it to halt its burrowing. Your psionic powers aren't so cool now, are they, Bob? And a cerebral parasite. Centipede. They're over here. These creatures are not visible to the human eye and can only be detected psionically by means of careful examination of a person's aura. They can then be removed only by a cure disease spell. If a psionically endowed creature comes within 1 foot of cerebral parasites, they will attack, but the attack will be completely unnoted. Thereafter, when psionic abilities, including attacks/defenses, are used, the parasites will drain additional psionic energy to feed upon. Each parasite will drain 1 energy point. Furthermore, after one is fed upon 6 psionic points, it will reproduce another parasite and thereafter continuing to drain energy, as will its offspring. They cannot be psionically attacked. Cerebral parasites inhabit the astral and ethereal planes as well as the material planes, and 3 to 12 of them appear. So if you come up with, let's see, 3 to 12 of them, that's 3 and 3. So there's 7 after they fed. So you could literally have someone trying to use psionic powers unable to and not know why. So all these glorious things can happen. And if you're wondering about gray ooze, if you've never really delved into psionic powers, certain gray ooze can attack with a psychic crush and kill psionicists. Fortunately, that doesn't really affect non-psionic characters, but just having a gray ooze just come blorping out of a hole in the wall every time you cast, not every time, but when you cast Cure Light Wounds on a party member, can be rather distressing. 1 to 3 of them. Oh, look, 3 of them. So yeah, gray ooze are pretty dangerous. Pretty potentially dangerous. So just keep that in mind, no pun intended, if your players insist on using psionics. Chris says, with adult players, I would have rolled just as you suggest. Yeah. I mean, if you're teaching people how to play AD&D, I think, and this is a good practice. This is a you should do this in your games. I'm giving you this advice level of good practice. Overall, regardless of whether you're using psionics or firearms or science fiction, do teach people to play AD&D. And that's going to be kind of the concluding thought for the day. As I've talked, and will continue to talk about the various praxis in the Dungeon Master's Guide, one thing you must keep in mind, that you absolutely must keep in mind, is the first player who plays AD&D, they've never played any form of D&D before, and you introduce them to AD&D, do go easy on them. If they're not experienced gamers, if they're not experienced war gamers, remember, we want more people playing AD&D and more people having fun playing AD&D. An experienced player who's played a lot of D&D campaigns, move without let or hindrance. Yes, psionic encounters. Yes, Tomb of Horrors. And so on and etc. The new player, go easy on them. If you're selling AD&D because you want to have more people play AD&D and enjoy the fun of AD&D, and everyone at the table is new, even if everyone is just one other person, don't go full ham, at least not initially. Give over a little bit. Give them a little bit of breathing room. Don't drop the 60-ton stone block on them when they step in the dungeon and then cackle maniacally and tell them that, they should have checked for traps when you never established that that was a possibility. And don't punish them for being clever players out of the gate. I've never played D&D, but I've heard a lot of jokes about 10-foot poles, so I'm going to buy a 10-foot pole, and I'm going to probe ahead of me on the floor. Don't be one of those invisible goalpost shifting dungeon masters where you're like, yeah, well, a pole would detect that pit trap, but I'm not going to let it happen because I want them to fall in. For new players, for brand new players, always reward clever gameplay, because that's the right way to play AD&D. Play it cleverly and cautiously. If they're incautious, give them ample warning that what they're doing may get them killed. If after a few sessions they're still playing foolishly, start bringing the hammer down on them. We don't need a thief. We don't need a cleric. We're just mighty fighters. We're like the Three Musketeers. Well, you got to bring the pain at that point. You got to bring the random psionic encounters. So those are just a few gameplay examples and so on. I hope you guys like the idea of using science fiction in your D&D games and firearms and so on in a limited fashion in your D&D games. You don't want that meathead fighter outpacing the magic user just because he invented blasting powder and has that wood-mounted steel tube. No. Keep that shit limited. So those are just a few ideas. Just a bit of food for thought. So that about wraps it up. For today, anyway. Sorry about the audio problems. Again, I honestly thought that the mic on the camera would pick it up and I'd be like, hey, I don't have to have the boom over there and look like, I'm Dr. Johnny Fever. Not that there's not a little bit of coolness that goes along with that. But, it didn't work. So I apologize for the muted moments. But hey, what's my live stream without technical difficulties, right? Go together like peanut butter and jelly. So Monday, we will be back with more best practices. And I think on Monday, we're going to take a look at something. There's plenty more in the Dungeon Master's Guide to explore. But remember, if you guys have any suggestions, you can reach out to me on the Discord. Yes, we have an official Discord. We do have an official Discord. So you can come check us out on Discord and suggest things, ask questions. I'm surprised. I get asked questions a lot on the Discord. I was just like, oh yeah, this will be a thing and, whatever. But no, we have an official Discord. Just like we have official theme music. That's right. My buddies over at Bards of Greyhawk created some absolutely fantastic music. I played it for you guys before. Working on an intro for that. You can check them out over at Bards of Greyhawk. .hearnow.com. That is, of course, that's the guys over there did just such a beautiful, beautiful job of putting together some music for me. And that's Jeremy Barber and Rich Lopez. You should check them out. It's fantastic stuff. It is AD&D Greyhawk themed music. I need to ask those guys, like, if I can ever have just like maybe as like a special weekend live stream or something, if I can have a just like a listening party for one of their albums, just play some of their music for you guys. But it'll be up to them. But I love those guys, and they contributed the music for the live stream, and it's a fantastic Zeppelin-y, Allman Brothers-y, CSNY sounding-y kind of piece, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So go check out their music. Anyway, guys, that about does it for me. Y'all have an absolutely wonderful and safe Labor Day weekend. I will see everybody on Monday. So have a good one. And I'll talk to y'all then. Be good to each other. Take care. Stay safe. Peace. Love you. Bye.